I'm Vinny Politan. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We begin this hour with news about one of Charles Manson's followers who's been granted parole 4 times only to have it reversed by California governors. Some of you may remember how the country was terrorized back in August of 1969 when followers of notorious cult leader Charles Manson killed pregnant actress Sharon Tate and 4 others. The night after that horrific crime, a grocer and his wife, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, were brutally murdered in their Los Angeles home. Leslie Van Houten was convicted in that double murder and sentenced to death. That sentence, though, was commuted to life, and eventually her conviction was thrown out. She was tried 2 more times and was eventually sentenced to 7 years to life. She was just 19 years old when she committed those murders. Van Houten is now 71, and in July, a panel recommended that she be released. But for a second time, California Governor Gavin Newsom overrode the recommendations 2 times, as well as Governor Jerry Brown. Let's bring in Court TV special contributor Ashley Banfield, who has more on this for us tonight.
So I don't know how you feel about the Manson story, Vinny, but if you're like the rest of us, you hear Manson and your ears perk up and you're wondering, what now? And you get a little bit of a chill. I don't know about you, but I certainly do. I have followed the Manson story because it sort of happened in my era. I was very little. I was 2 when those murders happened in California, in Los Angeles. Sharon Tate and her friends were murdered, and the day after, Rosemary and Leno LaBianca were murdered, and people were on edge until the police finally tracked down the Manson family. And when I say family, it was cult leader Charles Manson and his followers who were called his family. Leslie Van Houten was one of them. She was responsible in part for the murders of the LaBiancas. And this happened when she was 19, 50 years ago. So she's been in prison. She's had an unusual journey. She was sentenced to death with the rest of them. But back, what was it, 1972, California did away with the death penalty. And so that sentence was commuted to life. Then the conviction thrown out, then a retrial, then another retrial, and boom, she got the sentence she's currently sitting on, 7 years to life. Well, 7 years to life would mean that you're eligible for parole. And dozens of times, she's been eligible for parole and denied all the time. The weird part, Vinny, is that she's a model prisoner. Say what you will about the horrors of the Manson crimes. They were terrible. The LaBiancas were stabbed. Their blood was smeared all over the walls. It was horrifying. And the community was terrorized. But Leslie has never had an infraction in prison for 50 years. And again, she's serving 7 years to life. And yet she cannot beat this. She cannot get parole. Every time she gets granted parole, a governor, whether it's been Jerry Brown twice or Gavin Newsom twice, says, no, I'm just not going to go along with what the parole board says. So I wanted to know a lot more about this. Like, wait, how is that possible? Because we've covered stories where people who've done even worse crimes have gotten out much sooner. But is it just the lore of Manson that keeps these people in prison, these followers, and at least Leslie Van Houten? I asked her attorney, Rich Pfeiffer, and we had a conversation about everything. Have a listen.
Were you surprised at the decision the governor made?
I was surprised at the timing of it. I was not surprised at all with the decision.
Is that because this has happened over and over and over again, and Leslie hasn't seen the light of day for 5 decades?
There's no way a governor who's got a political career in front of him can ever sign off on her going home without some kind of repercussion on votes in the future. For that reason alone, no governor is ever going to let her out. It's going to be up to the courts.
And so tell me about that. What is the court battle? What does it entail? What do you have to prove for her to get out?
Well, first of all, the governor's burden is very, very minor. It's some evidence, which means any small modicum of evidence whatsoever that makes her a current and reasonable risk to public safety will uphold the governor's decision. But if there's no evidence, then the courts can overturn that reversal and send her home.
So the evidence, I think that's really critical. I read something that the governor said, evidence shows that she currently poses an unreasonable danger to society if released from prison. Do you have any idea what that evidence is that Governor Newsom is talking about?
He describes some vague concepts that have been dealt with over the years, over and over and over again, but he doesn't specifically come out with anything. If he doesn't use that language, he loses. So he has to use that language. The problem is he has to have some kind of facts to support it. And that's the challenge that we're going to take to court.
And I suppose that you haven't gotten to discovery yet, so you really don't know sort of what he has up his sleeve to try to prove that, or at least to show evidence, do you?
Oh, I've got all the discovery. I've got.
So what is it? Tell me what he's going to use as evidence.
There were 17 different psychologists through the years, and there are 23 different psychological evaluations for risk assessments, and every single one of them has evaluated Leslie as a low or very low risk if released. We're not saying she's innocent. We're not saying she didn't belong to go to prison. We're saying that after 51 years in prison, without a single prison disciplinary write-up, and all of the people she's helped rehabilitate through the years, is proof that she's no longer a current unreasonable risk to public safety.
I think for most people, they think if you commit a heinous murder, and let's be frank, the LaBiancas were stabbed to death, their blood was smeared on the walls. It was torture for the community until Manson and the followers were caught. They feel that you should be locked up with the key thrown away. And yet our system really does talk about rehabilitation. And to your point, she's had 0 infractions while being locked up for 50 years. Her sentence on the 3rd trial, this is another fact I think maybe a lot of people don't know, that she went to trial 3 times. And on the 3rd time, she was sentenced to 7 years to life. So it seems a little shocking, actually, to hear that she's still not eligible to be released, according to the governor. Do you know of any other cases where someone has had a sentence of that range and still can't get out?
Oh, there's plenty of people that have sentences like that that'll never go home because they're not demonstrating rehabilitation in prison or continue to violate prison rules, things like that. If they're not going to follow the rules in prison, why would you think they're going to follow the rules when they release them and they can't watch them?
But Leslie, has been an exemplary prisoner for all 5 decades. Talk to me a little bit about the things she's been doing.
Well, she's got a master's degree. Her thesis was on sustained rehabilitation. At every parole hearing, hundreds of inmates write letters and describe how she was the foundation to their rehabilitation. And she always starts it with making them look deep into their core as to what got them there, and then have to address it internally and honestly with themselves. And until they can do that, they can't even begin the rehabilitative process. And she's done it with so many others who are so grateful that she has taken the time with them.
Is this possibly an example of cruel and unusual punishment? If someone follows all the rules, gets an education, helps others, has no infractions, has a sentence of 7 to life, and just cannot get past the governor. Is that an argument you could raise?
It's one that we're going to raise, and there's a case pending right now at the California Supreme Court, In re Palmer 2, where a 17-year-old was convicted of a murder, and he was repeatedly denied parole. And the appellate court justice stated that this was a serial denial of parole. It was cruel and unusual punishment. He ordered that inmate released immediately without parole.
And do you think that this bodes well for Leslie?
If that case stands up at the Supreme Court, it absolutely bodes well for Leslie.
Leslie's 71. I mean, it is really hard to believe these crimes happened when she was 19. What would she want to do if she were released?
I think she wants to keep on doing what she is doing, which is help rehabilitate people who want to be rehabilitated.
But her name is famous, and anyone who finds out, who may be under the age of 40 and might not be as, steeped in the Manson lore, anyone who finds out that that isn't her past, this will haunt her no matter what, whether she's behind bars or not.
All of us have done things in our lives that we wished we didn't do when we were 19 years old.
But nothing to that extent, and you have to be with me on that.
I understand what it's like to have a bad past follow you the rest of your life. I have 7 strikes. I went to prison. I got out on an appeal, and then I went to college and law school. That has, to this day, followed me and prevented me from getting certain jobs and things like that. But it's also given me a unique perspective to where I can help clients that other attorneys who've never been through any of that can do. And Leslie's going to have that unique experience to be able to help people.
I'm fascinated by this case, and I always have been. And I'm curious to find out how things progress.
The one thing that I'm the most perplexed about is I believe that there was a lot of government involvement along the way. The law changed about 4 years ago where we got to go in and make a youthful offender sentencing hearing because all of a sudden being a youthful offender was a mitigating circumstance, but prior to that, it was not. And when I went calling around to past Manson cult members to try to figure out who I was going to call as witnesses, I ended up with Catherine Scher because she was the one that recruited Leslie. I asked them all, have you ever been arrested and not charged with a crime? And every single one of them was. A few days after the murders, law enforcement did the largest raid in California history at that time on the Manson ranch. They had a confidential informant at the ranch for a month. They knew Manson had a machine gun. They knew he had at least 4 stolen vehicles. They found the machine gun, a bazooka, other guns, 8 stolen vehicles, stolen credit cards in Manson's pocket. Everybody got arrested, and 2 days later, everybody got released. Manson was on parole. His parole was not violated. Do you know anybody who has a machine gun? Do you know anybody who has a bazooka? And if you're on parole and you have those things, can you imagine not having your parole violated? There was something going on where the police were running around doing their job, arresting the Manson cult members for everything that they were doing wrong. And somebody up in the DA's office was calling the shots saying, let them go, don't file any charges.
It's bizarre. I can't even begin to understand how that would have happened. But to this case, I am serious. I do want to continue our conversations as you progress. Thanks so much for doing this tonight.
Not a problem. Anytime.
And Vinny, you will probably remember back in 2017, Charles Manson died in prison, certainly serving out that commuted death sentence. It was commuted to life in prison, toe tag parole, as they call it. Went out with a toe tag. But Leslie Van Houten renounced Charles Manson long ago. Not only that, those other women that you saw, I should say girls, they were so young back then, in those pictures, that was Susan Atkins and Patricia Krenwinkel, also part of the Manson family, also involved in the various murders over the course of those 2 nights. They also denied parole. What I've really found interesting about this is that Rich, her lawyer, really knows of what he speaks because he is a former inmate. He pleaded to armed robbery. He served time. He went to law school afterwards, and he is a practicing attorney. He really embodies what the prison system is really supposed to be, Vinny, and that is rehabilitation, right? We want people who go in bad to come out good. And that is the conundrum of Leslie Van Houten, because as you heard, she got a master's degree. She's been counseling people. She's been rehabbing other prisoners for all of her 50 years and has utmost evidence to show this. And yet, Gavin Newsom continues to say this, evidence, and I'll quote, evidence shows that she currently possesses an unreasonable danger to society if released from prison. So, Rich is going to file another writ within the week. He has said this, I guarantee. He has said, I guarantee she will get out. If we follow the law, she will get out. And he thinks maybe even within 8 months.
That would be shocking, to say the least, for those of us that remember the story. You know, one thing he did say, though, he said, you know, Gavin Newsom with the political future, right? He's young, but Jerry Brown denied it also. He was at the end of the road of his political career, and he denied it also. So I just don't think anyone wants to let any Manson person go, anyone that remembers what happened.
Bingo, you nailed it. Nobody wants that on their epitaph, right? I released one of the Manson family. I remember the same thing about John Lennon's killer. The parole board saying none of us wants to be the person that released, that guy, or certainly not this guy, but, nobody wants to be connected because there is just such a story behind the name Manson and those followers. But you got to remember, 19 at the time, he was a very influential and powerful cult leader. Those young women, were hook, line, and sinker back then at 17. Many of them were runaways with troubled pasts and drug addictions. So I think you've just got to really look at what is it we're trying to do with our prison system, right? Do we want to say that our prison system is successful and that justice actually works, that we do rehabilitate, we do make good people out of bad kids? Because if that's the case, I'm really not 100% sure you could find a better example than Leslie Van Houten. And I know that there are going to be people just yelling at me right now. She's a double murderess. And I'm with you. She's a double murderess. She's admitted that 100%. And she has tried for 50 years, almost my entire life. Almost my entire life, she has tried to make good of the bad that she did. And she's done everything that the prison system and our justice system asks of our inmates. So where do we go from there, right? Why do we give 7 to life? What was the point of the 7, right?
We shall see. As you said, they're going to continue to pursue this, and we'll continue to follow it. Ashley Banfield, thank you so much.
You betcha.